I thought the life growing inside me was just a heavy secret, until they used it as the weapon to erase me. The night he walked away, my sister smiled like a victor, yet his mother looked at me with the quiet terror of someone watching a funeral. 7 years later, I came back to the place they buried the truth, carrying the only thing capable of bringing their empire down in a single evening. My name is Megan Hartley. I was 32 years old, a woman who had spent her entire childhood learning that the only thing permanent about a roof over your head was the inevitable eviction notice. I had built a small, disciplined life as a records specialist at Brighthaven Learning Center, a place where I organized chaotic files into neat, alphabetical rows, but nothing in my meticulously ordered existence had prepared me for becoming the wife of Colton Rains. Colton was the crown prince of Harbor Point, the heir to Rains Meridian Development. Marrying him felt like I was being pulled from the audience and shoved onto a stage under blinding spotlights. And right now, under the layers of silk and lace of my wedding gown hanging on the door, I was hiding a secret that could shatter the glass floor we were standing on. I was pregnant. I should have told him. I wanted to tell him, but the Rains family was currently navigating a public relations nightmare involving a zoning dispute, and the mandate from his father, Gideon, was clear, absolute perfection. No scandals. No surprises. I told myself I was protecting him by waiting until after the vows were spoken, the night before the ceremony. The air in our suite at the Harbor Point Grand was suffocating. I stepped out onto the balcony to get some air, but I froze when I saw Colton. He was on his phone, his back rigid. He was not the charming man who had proposed to me in Paris. He looked like a man listening to his own execution order. I stepped back inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. Suddenly, the service door to the suite creaked open. It was not room service. It was Dahlia, Colton's younger cousin, a girl who usually looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine but now looked disheveled and terrified. She rushed toward me, shoving a thick manila envelope into my hands. It felt heavy. It felt like dirty money. "Megan, listen to me," she hissed, her eyes darting to the balcony door. "Don't sign anything. Just go. Use the service elevator. Leave now, Dahlia. What are you?" "There is no time," she cut me off, her voice cracking. "He isn't who you think he is. None of them are. If you stay... God, if you stay, they will bury you." Before I could ask another question, the handle on the balcony door turned. Dahlia bolted out the way she came, vanishing like a ghost. Panic surged through me. I lifted the skirt of my backup dress and shoved the envelope into the garment bag, smoothing the fabric down just as Colton stepped into the room. His face was pale, but the moment he saw me, a switch flipped. The terror evaporated, replaced by a smile that was too wide, too bright, and completely hollow. It was a performance. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice dripping with a sweetness that suddenly tasted like saccharine. "Just finalizing some details with the planner. You look tense. You should rest." He walked past me to the bathroom, and I stood there, frozen. Through the crack in the bathroom door, I heard him make another call. His voice was a low growl, stripped of all that fake warmth. "She doesn't know anything," he whispered aggressively. "But if she finds out about Harbor Point Key, everything burns. Do you understand me? Everything burns. Harbor Point Key." The name meant nothing to me then, just a construction site on the other side of the river. But the way he said it made my blood run cold. My instinct screamed at me to run. I could feel the outline of the cash envelope near the dress. I could leave. But then I thought about the child growing inside me. I thought about the loneliness of the foster system, the endless rotation of strangers' houses. I wanted this baby to have a father. I wanted a name. I wanted to believe that Colton was just stressed, that Dahlia was just being dramatic or high. I convinced myself that I could fix this. I would marry him tomorrow, and once we were legally bound, I would tell him about the baby. We would be a family. I placed my hand over my flat stomach, feeling the tiny spark of life that was the only real thing in a room full of lies. Just get through tomorrow, I whispered to the empty room. Just get through tomorrow, and everything will be okay. I had no idea that tomorrow was the day my life would end. The morning after the wedding should have felt like the beginning of a life. But the air in the Rains estate felt more like the stale, recycled oxygen of a submarine. I walked into the dining room, my footsteps swallowed by the thick Persian rug, and found Gideon Rains sitting at the head of the mahogany table. He was cutting a piece of fruit with surgical precision, his silver knife clicking against the china in a steady, rhythmic beat that sounded like a ticking clock. He did not look up when I entered. Gideon had a way of controlling a room without speaking a word, a gravitational pull that demanded you shrink yourself to fit into his orbit. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding too thin in the cavernous room. "Megan," he acknowledged, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes were cold and assessing, like he was inspecting a structural flaw in one of his buildings. Lorraine sat to his right, nursing a cup of black tea. She offered me a smile, but it did not reach her eyes. Her face was puffy, the skin beneath her eyes dark and bruised, the look of a woman who had wept for 20 years in silence. "Have you heard from Dahlia?" I asked, taking my seat. "She left so abruptly last night." Lorraine flinched, her spoon clattering against the saucer. Gideon paused his cutting for a fraction of a second. "Dahlia is unwell," Lorraine said, her voice barely a whisper. "She has episodes. It is best not to indulge her fantasies." Before I could press further, the double door swung open. My sister, Brianna, breezed into the room as if she lived there. She was wearing a silk blouse that looked far too expensive for her salary as a receptionist, and her laugh was loud and jarring against the silence. Surprise, she beamed, walking straight past me to squeeze Colton's shoulder as he entered behind her. Her hand lingered on his jacket a second too long. "Colton said I could come by for brunch before you two jet off." "We are family now, right?" I felt a prickle of unease at the back of my neck. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the wedding was making me see ghosts where there were none. But when Colton sat down, he didn't look at me. He looked at Gideon. "There is one small housekeeping item before you leave," Gideon said, sliding a sleek leather folder across the table toward me. "What is this?" I asked. "Just standard post-nuptial formalities," Gideon replied smoothly. "An adjustment to the asset protection clauses and a confidentiality agreement regarding family business discussions. It protects everyone." I opened the folder. The legal jargon was dense, but the words non-disclosure and forfeit of claims jumped out at me. I looked at Colton for support, but he was busy pouring coffee for Brianna. "Sign it." "Megan," Colton said, his tone casual but his jaw tight. "It is just paper." I signed. I signed because I wanted to be a good wife. I signed because I was scared. Later that afternoon, while packing for our honeymoon, I tried to call Dahlia again. The line clicked and went straight to a robotic operator. I stared at my phone, realizing that the Wi-Fi in the guest wing was blocked and the landlines had no dial tone. I was not a guest here. I was an inmate. I went to the closet to grab Colton's blazer, intending to pack it. As I folded it, a hard plastic card slipped out of the inner pocket. I picked it up. It was a security access badge. Harbor Point Key, Zone C. The date stamped on the temporary access sticker was yesterday, the exact time Colton had been on the balcony, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Why was he at a construction site on our wedding day? "What are you holding?" I spun around. Brianna was leaning against the doorframe, watching me. I shoved the card into my palm, hiding it. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just packing." Brianna walked into the room, running her hand along the edge of the dresser. She stopped in front of me, her eyes drifting down to my stomach. "So," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You and Colton. Do you plan on having kids soon? My breath hitched. The secret inside me felt suddenly heavy, expanding to fill the room. I looked up and saw Colton standing behind her. His eyes were dark, warning me to shut my mouth. We haven't discussed it. I lied, my voice trembling. Good, Colton said, stepping between us. We have plenty of time. That night, the house was silent, but I could not sleep. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I cracked my bedroom door open and saw Colton standing outside Gideon's study. The heavy oak door was locked, but I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding back. Colton slipped inside. 10 minutes later, he came out. He looked different. The fear I had seen on the balcony was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow resolve. He looked like a man who had been given a mission. I went back to bed, my heart racing. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I grabbed it, expecting a spam notification. It was a text message from a blocked number. She is pregnant. Guess what they will do? I dropped the phone on the sheets as if it had burned me. I looked at the screen again, the white letters glowing in the dark, and for the first time, I realized that the envelope Dahlia had given me wasn't just hush money. It was a severance package. The silence in the bedroom was so thick it felt like physical weight. I stood by the window, watching the rain blur the lights of the city below, my hand instinctively guarding my stomach. I could not keep this secret for another hour. The weight of it was crushing me, and I needed Colton to be the man I thought I married, not the terrified heir I had seen on the balcony. Colton, I said, turning to face him. We need to talk. There is something. Not now, Megan. He cut me off, his voice sharp. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled me into his arms. It should have been comforting, but his embrace did not feel like love. It felt like containment. He held me too tight, his chin resting heavily on my head, effectively silencing me. We have the press brunch in 2 hours, he murmured into my hair. Just be perfect. Please. Just be perfect for me. When he finally released me to go shower, I felt cold. My eyes drifted to his laptop, which was sitting open on the duvet. The screen was glowing with a document titled Draft Release The Rain's Fairy Tale. I stepped closer. It was a pre-written article describing our perfect union and traditional family values, scheduled for automatic publication at noon. It was not a marriage announcement. It was a marketing strategy. I looked away, sick to my stomach, and noticed the edge of a file sticking out of the nightstand drawer he had hastily closed earlier. I pulled it open. The folder was old, the edges frayed. The label read, Harbor Point Key Scaffolding Collapse, Wrongful Death Suit, Settled. I stared at the word, settled. It was stamped in red ink, final and bloody. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Lorraine, meet me at the Riverbend Cafe, come alone. 30 minutes. The cafe was empty, save for a barista wiping down the counter. Lorraine was sitting in the back corner, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. She looked small, stripped of her expensive jewelry and her public facade. Lorraine. I sat down opposite her. What is going on? What is Harbor Point Key? She looked up, her eyes swimming with fear. She reached across the table and gripped my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. You think you are here because he loves you, she whispered, her voice trembling. But you are not a wife, Megan. You are a lock. A lock, I asked, confused. What do you mean? 3 years ago, a man died, she hissed, glancing at the door. A foreman at the key. The scaffolding was cheap. Gideon knew. Colton knew. Colton was there when it fell. He saw the man. She choked back a sob. Gideon used money to make the family disappear. He used influence to scrub the police reports. But Colton, he saw it. He is weak. Megan, he breaks under pressure. Gideon needed someone safe to anchor him. Someone with no family, no connections, no power. someone who would not ask questions. I pulled my hand back, feeling like the floor was dissolving beneath me. So I am just damage control. You are the distraction, she said, tears spilling over. But if you know something, if you know anything, you have to run. I drove back to the estate in a daze. I parked the car down the driveway and walked the rest of the way, needing the cold air to clear my head. As I approached the main house, I saw them through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the sunroom, Colton and Brianna. They were standing close, too close. Colton was leaning down, whispering something to her, his hand gripping her upper arm with an intensity that looked like desperation. Brianna was not pulling away. She was listening, her face set in a hard, calculating line. I opened the front door, and the sound of the latch made them jump. They separated instantly, like magnets repelling, Megan Brianna exclaimed, her voice pitching too high. We were just discussing the gift registry. I did not answer. I walked past them, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I went straight to the study where the main phone line records were kept. My hands shook as I scrolled through the digital log. In the week leading up to the wedding, there were 5 calls to my number. There were 42 calls to Brianna. I went upstairs and pulled the envelope Dahlia had given me out of the garment bag. I had been too scared to look closely before. Now, I dumped the contents onto the bed. Bundles of $100 bills spilled out, but it was the envelope itself that caught my eye. I held it up to the light. The watermark was faint but unmistakable. Rains Meridian Development, Legal Department. This was not Dahlia trying to help me escape. This was a payroll transaction. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to breathe, when I noticed Brianna's phone sitting on the vanity. She must have left it when she came up to check on me earlier. The screen lit up with a notification, but it was the Open Notes app that froze my blood. It was a draft written 2 days ago. If you don't tell her, I will, and I will take everything. I am done waiting in the wings. Colton, choose. I dropped the phone. The room spun. Brianna wasn't just the sister who betrayed me. She was the one holding the match, and I was standing in the middle of the gasoline. The dinner table that night felt less like a family meal and more like a tribunal. I sat there, my hands trembling in my lap, listening to the silverware scrape against fine china. I knew I had to speak. If I let them control the narrative, I would disappear. I needed to claim my pregnancy before they could weaponize it. I took a deep breath, preparing to drop the truth onto the table like a grenade. I have something to say. I started, my voice shaking. Colton, there is something I have been keeping from you because... Stop. The scream tore through the room. It was Brianna. She stood up so abruptly, her chair fell backward with a crash. Tears were already streaming down her face, a perfect, practiced performance of heartbreak. Oh, God, Colton, I can't let her do this to you, she sobbed, pressing a napkin to her mouth. I promised I wouldn't say anything. But she is pregnant. The room went dead silent. I stared at my sister, my mouth open in shock. Brianna, I stammered. What are you? Don't lie. Megan. She shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. She told me right before the wedding. She is pregnant. Colton, and it isn't yours. She trapped you. The air left my lungs. It was a lie so bold, so calculated that I couldn't even form a defense. I looked at Colton, desperate for him to laugh, to tell her she was crazy. But he didn't laugh. He looked down at his plate. Gideon placed his fork down gently. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had just closed a deal. Is this true? Megan Gideon asked, his tone terrifyingly polite. Are you carrying a child that does not belong to my son? No, I stood up, gripping the edge of the table. That is insane. I have never been with anyone else. Colton, tell them you know me. Tell them Colton finally looked up. His eyes were red, rimmed with a mixture of shame and fear. He looked at his father, then at Brianna, and finally at me. Colton started, his voice cracking. I can't do this. Megan, the company. The investors. I can't be attached to another scandal right now. Scandal, I whispered, feeling the blood drain from my face. It's your baby. Colton, we will require a paternity test. Naturally, Gideon interjected smoothly, sliding a document across the polished wood. But until then, for the sake of the family reputation, we need to annul this union. This is a voluntary withdrawal form. It states that you misled Colton regarding your condition, and that you accept a settlement to leave quietly. I'm not signing that, I said, my voice rising. Then you leave with nothing, Gideon said, snapping his fingers. 2 security guards I had never seen before stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. Escort Ms. Hartley out. Keep her phone. It is company property now. Lorraine. I looked at Colton's mother, pleading. Please. Lorraine started to rise, her hand reaching out, but Gideon simply cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it hit her like a whip. She sank back into her chair, her eyes fixed on her empty plate, looking like a statue of grief. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the curb outside the estate gates. It was raining. They had taken my phone. They had taken my car keys because the car was leased in Colton's name. All I had was the envelope of hush money Dahlia had given me and the engagement ring I had wrenched off my finger and shoved into my pocket. I walked 3 miles to a gas station and called a cab to take me back to my old apartment, the one I hadn't officially moved out of yet. When I walked inside, the smell of stale air and dust hit me, and I ran to the bathroom, retching until there was nothing left in my stomach. I curled up on the cold tile floor, shivering. The pain wasn't just heartbreak. It was the brutal realization that my own sister had looked me in the eye and sold me out. I crawled to my laptop, needing to contact someone, anyone. But when I opened my inbox, there was a new email from Brighthaven Learning Center, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. Subject notice of indefinite administrative leave. Dear Ms. Hartley, due to recent concerning reports from parents regarding your personal conduct, we are placing you on unpaid leave effective immediately. They moved faster than the speed of light. They had erased my marriage, my home, and my career in under 2 hours. I sat there in the dark, refreshing the local news page on my browser, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. A breaking news banner flashed across the screen of the Harbor Point Gazette. Breaking Rain's Meridian. Heir announces engagement. Colton Rains to marry childhood friend Brianna Hartley in effort to unite families after brief, mistaken whirlwind romance with younger sister ends. I stared at the photo. It was Brianna and Colton, holding hands, smiling like the perfect couple. The timestamp on the photo was from this morning. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had replaced me before I even left the table. 7 years is a lifetime when you are rebuilding yourself from ash. I now lived in Pineford, a quiet town 3 hours north of the city, where the winters were harsh and the neighbors asked no questions. I was no longer the frightened girl who had been escorted out of a mansion in the rain. I was a mother to a 6-year-old boy named Noah, and I was a senior auditor for Gray Line Compliance, a firm hired by corporations to find the skeletons in their closets before the government did. I did not spend those 7 years sharpening a knife. I spent them sharpening my mind. I went back to school at night. I learned forensic accounting. I learned that the most dangerous weapon in the world is not a gun or a scandal, but a paper trail. I learned that if you follow the money long enough, it always leads you to the rot. It was a Tuesday morning when the past landed on my desk. My boss dropped a heavy stack of files next to my coffee. Big one. Megan, he said, tapping the cover. Rain's Meridian Development. They are prepping for a massive IPO. They want a full internal audit to ensure their books are spotless for the SEC. Clean them up. I stared at the logo. The stylized R looked like a serpent coiling around a pillar. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I felt a cold, clinical detachment, like a surgeon looking at a tumor. I opened the digital index, buried under hundreds of subcontractor agreements. I found it. Project Code Harbor Point Key, Zone C. The breath trapped in my throat released slowly. It was still there, the wound that had never healed. That evening, I sat in my home office with the encrypted laptop I used for sensitive comms. A notification pinged. It was an email from a sender with no name. Routed through 3 different servers. I know you have the file. I did not run. So make it end. Dahlia. She had been watching. She had been waiting for me to get into a position where I could strike. She knew I was the auditor before I even accepted the assignment. I opened a separate browser window and searched for them. Brianna was plastered all over the society pages. The Angel of Harbor Point. The headlines called her. She was wearing white, cutting ribbons at charity galas, looking every inch the benevolent matriarch. Colton was featured in Business Monthly as the visionary young CEO who had modernized the family empire. They looked golden. They looked untouchable. I looked away from the screen and walked down the hall to Noah's room. He was asleep. His messy dark hair splayed across the pillow. He had Colton's chin. He had Colton's eyelashes, but he had my heart. I made a silent vow right then. I would not use my son. I would not drag a child into a war started by monsters. I would not lie. I would not plant false evidence. I would simply shine a light so bright that the shadows would have nowhere left to hide. I went back to my desk and opened a fresh notebook. I wrote the Reigns audit on the cover. I began to list the players, the dates, and the flow of money. I created a column for Harbor Point Key and a column for the hush money. Then, in red ink, I wrote the question that had haunted me for 7 years. Who sent the text message about the pregnancy someone had warned me that night? Someone inside that house had tried to give me a head start, and I needed to know if they were a friend or another enemy waiting to stab me in the back. I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. The darkness in the room felt different tonight. It wasn't lonely. It was expectant. I walked back to Noah's door and leaned against the frame, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. Mommy isn't going to ruin anyone's life. Baby, I whispered into the quiet house. I am just going to return it to its rightful owner. The digital archive of Reigns Meridian Development was a labyrinth designed to bore anyone looking closely, but I wasn't looking for excitement. I was looking for a mistake. It took me 3 days to find the first loose thread. It was a safety compliance waiver for the Harbor Point Key project, dated 7 years ago. At the bottom, in blue ink, was a signature I knew better than my own. Colton Reigns, Site Supervisor. My breath hitched. Colton had told me he was just visiting the site that day. He had told me he was a passive witness to the accident. But this document proved he had authorized the use of Class C structural supports to cut costs. He hadn't just watched the man die. He had signed the order that killed him. I followed the money trail from that signature. The invoices for the steel didn't go to a reputable supplier. They went to a company called Meridian Safety Supplies, which immediately transferred 80% of its funds to Cobalt Scaffold LLC. I ran a background check on Cobalt. It had no employees, no office, and its registered address was a derelict warehouse in New Jersey. It was a shell game. A secure message popped up on my screen from Dahlia. The memorial room. East wing. Behind the portrait of great-grandfather Silas. There is a wall safe. Gideon keeps the master keys and the backup drives there. He thinks nobody knows the combination, but I watched him open it once. Left, right, left, dates of birth. I memorized the information and deleted the message. I needed more than just a location. I needed someone who could scream the truth loud enough to wake up the state. I drove to a rundown diner on the edge of town to meet Evan Pike. He had been a sharp investigative journalist until he tried to cover the key collapse, after which he was sued into oblivion and blacklisted. He looked older than his years, nursing a cup of black coffee with a shaking hand. "Why are you here, Ms. Hartley?" Evan asked, his voice rough. "If this is a setup, tell Gideon I have nothing left to take." "It is not a setup," I said, sliding a folder across the greasy table. "I want to give you the story you lost, but this time, I have the receipts." Evan opened the folder. His eyes widened as he scanned the flowcharts I had created. "This," he pointed to a column marked Charitable Donations. "This is Brianna's foundation." "Look closer," I said. "The Rains Hope Fund receives donations from the family trust. Within 48 hours, exact amounts are paid out as consulting fees to families of accident victims. Brianna isn't running a charity. Evan, she is running a money laundering operation for hush money." Evan looked up at me, a spark of life returning to his eyes. "This destroys the saint narrative. This destroys everything. I am not done," I said. I had finally traced the number that had texted me the night of the wedding. It didn't belong to a burner phone. It belonged to Sarah Jenkins, Gideon's former senior paralegal. She hadn't disappeared. She had fled to Ohio and changed her name. She was the leak. She had tried to warn me because she saw the paperwork being drafted to trap me. But the final nail in the coffin came from a bankrupt subcontractor's hard drive I had purchased as part of the audit assets. Buried in a folder named Site Security Backup, there was a corrupt video file. I spent 4 hours restoring it. The video was grainy, shot from a high angle at the construction site in the middle of the night. You couldn't see faces clearly, but the audio was terrifyingly crisp. "Get the bodies out of here," a voice growled. It was Gideon Rains. "Melt the steel down. Tonight. If the inspectors see this grade of metal, we lose the insurance." Then a younger voice, trembling and weak. "Dad, we can't just—" "Shut up!" Colton Gideon roared. "Do what is necessary, or do you want to go to prison?" I sat back in my chair, the cold light of the monitor illuminating the dark room. It hit me then. This was never a love triangle. Brianna wasn't just a jealous sister, and I wasn't just a scorned wife. I was a liability management strategy. Colton married me because I was an orphan with no resources, someone they thought they could easily silence if I ever found out what he did. I wasn't a wife. I was a witness they intended to bury. I took the flash drive and sealed it in a heavy envelope along with the financial spreadsheets. I addressed it to the State Financial Investigation Bureau. Attention to the Director of Fraud. I did not sign my name. I picked up a pen and wrote a single note on a plain white card to slip inside. "I have the thing he cannot buy." I dropped the package in the mailbox at 3 a.m. As the metal door clanged shut, I didn't feel fear. I felt the immense, crushing weight of 7 years finally lifting off my shoulders. The clock had started ticking, and this time, Gideon Rains didn't control the time. Returning to the Rains estate felt like walking into a museum dedicated to a war I had barely survived. I parked my rental car between a line of luxury sedans and smoothed the lapels of my blazer. I was not Megan the orphan today. I was Ms. Hartley, the senior auditor from Grayline Compliance, and I was the only thing standing between Rains Meridian Development and their public offering. When the heavy oak doors opened, Brianna was waiting. She wore a dress that likely cost more than my first year of rent in Pineford. She threw her arms open, her face arranged in a mask of delighted surprise that made my stomach turn. "Megan, my God, look at you," she exclaimed, stepping forward as if she hadn't destroyed my life with a lie 7 years ago. "It is so professional of you to take this on." We were worried it might be awkward. "I am a professional, Brianna," I said, stepping past her embrace. The fee was substantial. Colton appeared from the hallway. He stopped dead when he saw me. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the panic of the man who had abandoned me. But then, the CEO training kicked in. He adjusted his cufflinks and extended a hand. "Ms. Hartley," he said, his voice steady but lacking warmth. We appreciate Greyline's thoroughness. I shook his hand. It was cold. I am sure you do. Mr. Rains, transparency is key to a successful IPO. He didn't hold my gaze. He was still the same coward who chose safety over truth. Gideon Rains was waiting in the library. He did not rise from his leather chair. He gestured for me to sit, his eyes scanning me with that familiar, predatory calculation. You have done well for yourself. Megan, Gideon said, his voice smooth like aged whiskey. I trust you understand the delicacy of our history. We wouldn't want old misunderstandings to cloud your professional judgment. My judgment is based on numbers. Gideon, I replied evenly. Numbers don't have feelings, and they don't lie. Later, during a break in the initial review, I found myself cornered near the solarium by Lorraine. She looked more fragile than I remembered, her hands twisting a silk handkerchief. She pulled me into the shadow of a large fern, her eyes wide and wet. The baby, she whispered, her voice trembling. Megan, did you keep the baby? I looked at her. I didn't blink. I didn't offer her comfort. That is not a question you get to ask, I said softly. You lost that right when you let them throw me out into the rain. I walked away, leaving her shaking. Dinner was a performance. Brianna sat next to Colton, playing the role of the doting wife. She poured wine and laughed too loudly. So, I heard you have a son, Brianna said, swirling her glass. Noah. Right. He must be 6, 7. The table went quiet. Colton stared at his wine glass. He is 6, I said, cutting my steak, and the father Brianna pressed, her eyes glinting with malice. Is he in the picture? Noah is the son of the only person who didn't leave me, I said, looking directly at Colton. He is doing just fine. After dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom but looped back toward the library. The door was ajar. I heard Gideon's voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone on the phone. Prepare the medical evaluations, Gideon said. If the audit goes sideways, we revert to Plan B. My cognitive decline. Stress-induced memory loss. It worked before. Just have the paperwork ready. I stepped back into the shadows. He was preparing to plead insanity or incompetence, just like he had planned for Colton years ago. I walked back into the main hall and found Brianna waiting for me. She wasn't smiling anymore. She looked tired, and for the first time, I saw the fear behind her eyes. You think you are clever coming back here, she hissed. But Gideon owns this town. He bought me, Megan. He gave me this life, this house, this name. I earned my place. Do not think you can take it. He bought you, I repeated, realizing the depth of it. You didn't testify against me because you loved Colton. You did it because it was a job offer. She didn't deny it. She just turned and walked away. The next morning, I sat across from Gideon in his office. I placed a requisition form on his desk. I need the original raw data for the Harbor Point key accounts from 2018. I said, not the digital summaries, the physical ledgers. Gideon stiffened. Those are archived. It would take weeks to retrieve them. Then the IPO waits weeks, I said, closing my laptop. I cannot sign off on the audit without them. Unless, of course, they don't exist. He looked at me, a flicker of genuine danger in his eyes. He leaned forward. Tell me. Megan, he said softly, did you come back here to apologize for the trouble you caused? Or did you come back to demand a debt? I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I didn't come for an apology. Gideon, I said, meeting his stare, and I don't want your money. I came back to balance the books. I knew someone had been in my room the moment I unlocked the door. It was not a chaotic burglary. It was surgical. The cash I had left in the safe was untouched, and my laptop was exactly where I had left it, but the hard copy of my audit schedule which I had placed on the nightstand, was gone. They did not want my money. They wanted to know my next move. I immediately called Evan Pike. "They are on to us. Megan," Evan said, his voice tight with stress. "I just got a cease and desist letter from their legal team. They are threatening to sue me for defamation before I even print a word. They are scared. Megan, they are terrified. Stay low." "Evan," I said, "do not post anything yet." I tried to message Dahlia next, but my texts turned green instead of blue. She was offline. Gideon had likely cut her off, isolating the weak link just as he had isolated me 7 years ago. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I was running out of time. I spent the next hour uploading every file, every photo, and every scanned ledger to a triple encrypted cloud server. I sent the access key to an independent attorney in Chicago with strict instructions if I missed our check-in call by more than 24 hours. The entire folder goes to the press and the FBI. It was a digital dead man switch. If they silenced me, the truth would scream even louder. That night, a knock came at my door. I checked the peephole and saw Colton. He was alone, wearing a hoodie, looking nothing like the polished CEO from the magazines. I opened the door but left the security chain on. "What do you want?" I asked. "Please," he whispered, leaning his forehead against the door frame. "I just need to talk." 5 minutes. I let him in. He paced the small room, rubbing his face with his hands. "I knew," he said suddenly, stopping in front of the window. "Knew what about the baby?" he said, his voice cracking. "I knew you were pregnant before the wedding. Brianna told me." The air left the room. I stared at him, feeling a fresh wave of betrayal wash over me. "You knew I asked." My voice dangerously quiet. "You knew, and you still let them throw me out like trash." "Gideon gave me a choice," Colton shouted, then lowered his voice, looking at the door. "He told me I could have the CEO position and the legacy, or I could have a scandal with a foster girl. He said love doesn't pay the bills." "So you chose?" I said, cold as ice. "You made your calculation. Don't call it force." "Colton, you were a coward." He sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. "I am sorry. Megan, God, I am so sorry. But you have to stop this audit. You are going to destroy everything. Please. Don't burn it all down. I am not the arsonist. Colton," I said, opening the door. "I am just the ashes. Get out." After he left, I went back to the files. I was looking for leverage, anything to explain why Brianna was so loyal to a man like Gideon. I dug into the old employment contracts, specifically the non-disclosure agreement they had forced me to sign. I found a clause I had missed in my youth. Signatory agrees to a permanent ban from employment in any educational facility within the tri-state area. I stared at the paper. It wasn't just bad luck that I couldn't get a job after Bright Haven. They had blacklisted me. They had actively hunted me to ensure I couldn't rebuild my life in the only career I loved. My anger fueled my focus. I turned my attention to Brianna's financial records within the family trust. I found a series of monthly payments going to a private medical facility in Switzerland, labeled consulting. I cross-referenced the dates. The payments started 8 months before her son, Leo, was born. I hacked into the metadata of the transaction. The beneficiary wasn't a consultant. It was a fertility clinic specializing in donor anonymity. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Leo wasn't Colton's son. Brianna had likely used a donor because Colton was sterile or because they never actually slept together. Gideon knew. He was paying for the silence. That was the chain around Brianna's neck. If the world found out the heir wasn't a Rains by blood, her fairy tale would dissolve, and Gideon would cut her off without a cent. She wasn't the queen of the castle. She was just another hostage. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the hard wood. I picked it up. It was a text from Lorraine. "The safe in the memorial room. Come tomorrow night. I will leave the garden door unlocked. I will open it." I looked at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The matriarch was finally ready to break the cycle. The side door to the Raines estate had not changed in 7 years, but the woman opening it had. Lorraine stood in the shadows of the service entrance, the rain dripping from the eaves behind me. She was not shaking. She was not crying. She looked like a woman who had been carrying a stone on her back for decades and had finally decided to drop it. "Hurry," she whispered, stepping aside. Before the shift change, she led me through the dark hallways, past the portraits of dead ancestors who watched us with judging eyes. We reached the memorial room, a space dedicated to the family's legacy. Lorraine walked straight to the painting of Silas Raines and pulled the frame. It swung forward on silent hinges. Left, right, left. She recited the combination as she spun the dial. Their birthdays. It is always their birthdays. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, stacked neatly beside piles of bonds and deeds, was a black leather ledger. I pulled it out, my fingers brushing against the cold leather. I opened it to the middle. It was an accounting of sins. Every bribe to a city inspector, every payout to a silence witness, every dollar spent to cover up the blood at Harbor Point Key. And there, on the last page of the 2018 fiscal year, was a single entry written in Gideon's sharp, angular handwriting. Megan Pawn, $50,000. Disposed. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. I wasn't a person to them. I was a line item. Next to the ledger was a small silver USB drive. I plugged it into my tablet. An audio file loaded. It was Gideon's voice, clear and commanding. No, that is not convincing enough. I need to look confused, like I don't recognize the document. Let's try it again. I don't recall signing this. My memory, it isn't what it used to be. He wasn't losing his mind. He was rehearsing a performance to evade prison. "Give it to me." I spun around. Brianna was standing in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of designer silk. She was in a bathrobe, her hair messy, her eyes rimmed with red. She didn't look like a threat. She looked desperate. "Brianna," I said, clutching the ledger to my chest. "It is over." "I don't want to stop you," she said, her voice cracking. She took a step forward, her hands shaking. "I need that book. Megan, if he goes down, he takes me with him. I need leverage. I need to cut a deal." Why I asked. The question bursting out of me. "Why did you do it? Why did you destroy me?" She laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Because he loved you, Colton. He actually saw you. I have spent my whole life being the perfect doll, the perfect daughter, the perfect accessory, and you, the girl from nowhere. You were the only one he ever looked at with anything other than obligation. I wanted it. I wanted to be the one who won." "You didn't win," I said, my voice low. "You were just the next victim." I held up the ledger. "I am not giving you this." "You have a choice, Brianna. Either you speak the truth before a judge, or this book speaks for you. She won't have to speak alone." Colton stepped out from the hallway behind Brianna. He looked at me, then at the ledger in my hands. He looked terrified, but he didn't look away. "I am done," Colton said, his voice trembling but distinct. "I am done covering for him. I will testify. Megan, I will tell them everything. How touching." The voice came from the shadows of the library entrance connected to the memorial room. Gideon Raines stepped into the light. He was fully dressed in a 3-piece suit, as if he had been expecting company. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, like a king watching his subjects fail a simple test. "I knew you would come back," Gideon said, looking at me with a sneer. "And I knew my son was too weak to hold the line. It is pathetic, really." He snapped his fingers. Two large men from his private security detail emerged from the darkness behind him. "Take the bag," Gideon ordered calmly. "Confiscate the drives. Escort the ladies out. And Colton, go to your room." The guards stepped forward. Brianna gasped and shrank back. Colton tried to step in front of me, but I didn't move. I didn't run. I just checked my watch. "It is too late." "Gideon," I said. "Nothing is too late when you own the city." He scoffed. "I don't have the evidence anymore," I said, holding up my empty hands. The moment I opened that safe, a signal was sent to my server. Evan Pike just published the story. My lawyer just emailed the entire digital copy of that ledger to the FBI and the state attorney general. It has been in their inbox for 2 minutes. Gideon's face went pale. For the first time in his life, the calculation failed. In the distance, through the heavy rain, the faint wail of sirens began to rise, cutting through the silence of the night. I looked him in the eye. "You can't buy this one." Gideon listened to the approaching sirens. He adjusted his tie, a smile creeping back onto his face that was colder than death. "You poor child," he whispered. "Do you really think the law moves faster than my money?" The courtroom was a theater of sharks, and for the first time in 7 years, I was not the bait. I walked toward the witness stand wearing a simple charcoal suit, no jewelry, and no makeup to hide the sharp lines of my face. The gallery was packed with reporters, their cameras clicking like a swarm of mechanical locusts. I sat down, placed my hands on the railing, and looked directly at Gideon Rains. He did not look back. His defense attorney stood up, buttoning his jacket with a smug confidence. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Mr. Rains is an elderly man suffering from advanced cognitive decline. He cannot be held responsible for the administrative errors of his subordinates. He does not even recall signing these documents. It was the performance of a lifetime." Gideon sat slumped in his chair, mouth slightly open, looking frail and confused. It was Plan B, exactly as the audio recording had predicted. "I would like to submit evidence item 14, I said, my voice cutting through the lawyer's monologue. "A digital audio file recovered from the defendant's personal safe." The judge nodded. The recording played over the courtroom speakers. Gideon's voice, sharp, lucid, and commanding, filled the silence, rehearsing the very dementia defense he was now using. No, that is not convincing enough. I need to look confused. The color drained from Gideon's face. The frailty vanished, replaced by a look of pure venomous hatred. Then, the unthinkable happened. Lorraine stood up from the front row. "Sit down, Lorraine," Gideon hissed, forgetting his act. "No," she said, her voice shaking but loud enough to be heard. "I will not sit down. I have been sitting down for 40 years while you buried people." She turned to the judge. I knew. I knew about the accident. I knew about the payoffs. I stayed silent because I was afraid he would destroy me like he destroyed everyone else. But I am done being his jailer. A gasp rippled through the room. Gideon looked at his wife as if she had stabbed him. Colton took the stand next. He didn't look at his father. He looked at the floor. "The marriage to Brianna was a merger," Colton admitted, his voice hollow. "My father needed to cover up the scandal. He told me if I didn't leave Megan, I would lose my inheritance. I was a coward. I left a pregnant woman to save my bank account. And Ms. Hartley's pregnancy." The prosecutor asked. "Was it the result of an affair?" "No," Colton whispered. "It was mine. We lied to discredit her. Brianna was called last." She walked to the stand, looking at Gideon, then at the ledger sitting on the prosecutor's table. She knew the ship was sinking, and Brianna Hartley was a survivor. "Did you fabricate the story about your sister's infidelity?" the prosecutor asked. Brianna took a deep breath. "Yes. Gideon promised me a seat at the table. He promised me financial security for life if I helped him invalidate Megan. I signed the affidavit because he paid me to. The judge turned to me. Ms. Hartley, is there anything else? I looked at the gallery where the press was frantically typing. I looked at Colton, who was weeping silently. For 7 years, they called me a liar, I said clearly. They said I trapped a man with another man's child. My son, Noah, is 7 years old. He is the biological son of Colton Rains. But I did not come here today to ask for child support. I did not come here to ask for a title. I came here to prove that a victim does not need to be perfect to deserve justice. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. The judge denied bail. Gideon Rains was arrested immediately on charges of fraud, obstruction of justice, bribery, and conspiracy to conceal a wrongful death. The assets of Rains Meridian Development were frozen pending a federal investigation. As the bailiff handcuffed Gideon, he looked at me. The arrogance was gone. He looked old. He looked finished. Outside the courtroom, the rain had stopped. Colton pushed through the crowd of reporters to reach me. Megan, he pleaded, reaching for my arm. Megan, please. I know I can't fix the past, but now that the truth is out, maybe we can try. For Noah, I stepped back. You missed Noah's first steps. Colton, you missed his first words. You missed the fevers and the nightmares. You don't get to show up for the victory lap when you didn't run the race. I want to make it right, he said, tears streaming down his face. Then live a decent life. I said, that is how you make it right. But you do it away from us. I walked away from him. I signed the papers that dissolved the non-disclosure agreement and restored my teaching credentials. I walked down the courthouse steps to where my lawyer was holding Noah's hand. My son looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. Is it over? Mom, I knelt and zipped up his jacket. I looked back one last time at the heavy iron doors of the courthouse, listening to the sound of the locks clicking shut behind Gideon Rains. Yes, baby, I whispered. In the past, I was silent because I was scared. Today, I am silent because I have said enough, and they will have to live with the truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Megan's revenge. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people. See you in the next one.